particularly difficult, isn't it, for so many people? It's a weekend of remembrance, of course, but really, when you think about it, it's touched every single one of our lives, whether it be, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a distant relative, even just a close family friend. Everybody was affected by this particular situation. And even when we look back all of these years later and we take time out to remember them, we should be incredibly grateful for all of the sacrifices that they made. It's hard to imagine now just how brave these very young men and women around the world literally sacrificed their lives so that we can live in the world that we live in today. Some people might say it's not a better world that they were fighting for, but this is where, as ever, it's debatable, and that's the problem with things like war. Now, of course, the British royal family didn't escape, as they famously said, the ongoings of war. It was very difficult for His Majesty the King, King George. He absolutely loathed the idea of broadcasting, naturally because of his personal stammer. And everybody now knows about Lionel Logan, exactly how he got him over that problem. But you see, there was a bigger problem looming inside the British monarchy that not many people truly know about. But on the other side of the coin, it made it very difficult for them to represent the great British public, simply because the errant actions of somebody else halfway around the world was making sure that they could cause exactly the biggest amount of trouble that they possibly could. And this was all because they felt their rightful place as a power player, as the head, and more importantly, alongside the woman that they loved, should rightly be theirs. Let me explain. Well, good to see you today. Thank you so much as ever for your time. Nice to have your company. It is a moment of reflection, isn't it? It should be more than that once a year. We often should think about all those wonderful people, not just at this time of year, but have given so much of their time and their lives. And as we know, when we look back at the royals at war, there we had Princess Elizabeth doing her bit, Princess Margaret literally going undercover and dancing at various charitable canteen events across London, basically just to cheer up all of the young men and women that were doing so much at the front. As I mentioned, you see, King George wasn't particularly great at broadcasting, but he managed to overcome that. And some suggest that the war, in fact, forced him through because obviously he knew he needed to speak to his people. Now, the narrative goes, as many people now know, because we've covered many stories on this channel about Wallis Simpson and, of course, the deposed king, was the fact that, he gave it all up for love. But really, a little bit like a story that goes on today, it wasn't necessarily all about love. It was about power. And this particular image was meant to put shift the sands of time in particular. It's famous, of course, and it really sent shockwaves through the British monarchy. It's hard to imagine just how powerful that picture was in that particular time. This is an age of no social media, no digitals, all that sort of stuff, but it was printed around the world. As, of course, we escalated towards war in September 1939, and Neville Chamberlain came back out basically saying he'd done things but he couldn't do enough, this image came back out to haunt the royals again. Of course, their genomic heritage made it very difficult, some might say, to be down the line, and that's the reason why at the very turn of the century they changed their name to Windsor. Interesting was, as the war developed, the disposed king, as it were, he wasn't giving in lightly, and he tried many different tricks in order to make sure that he could at points reclaim the crown. He truly felt behind the scenes that, that was his rightful place, and really, people were just being spiteful. He should have been allowed to marry the woman that he loved by his side, and rightly so, she should have been the queen. Now, this created, as you can imagine, a huge problem for the monarchy, so much so that the Prime Minister at the time, Winston Churchill, basically said you need to get out there and meet the people and meet them quickly. Hence the reason all senior royals were up and down touring the United Kingdom in terrible situations, seemingly because they wanted to placate the backlash. Now, in case you didn't know, that particular individual had promised to put that king back on the throne once he won power. And the idea really was that he was backing that because he felt this was the only person that could do it. But what happened in the intervening years was they couldn't, that is the royals, have a member of their family really, exposed at that level, you understand. So the story was very radically changed. Now, this may make you change your opinion of the king of the time, right? David, as he was known, because he very much allowed Wallis Simpson to virtually take the blame for the fact that he'd given up everything for the woman that he loved. And she was painted as the spiteful person, the evil person that, of course, had, ruined the monarchy. When in effect it was his own sheer determination to grab power back that actually changed and really moved everything in a totally different direction. And that's truly the story behind exactly why all senior members of the British monarchy ostracised him for so many years. Actually, they found her not bearable as such, but they realised that she wasn't the villain of the piece. She knew that she'd, to coin a phrase of a modern thing, taken a hit for that simply because of what he'd given up for her, allegedly. But the true story was, what he'd really given up was his own ego. He couldn't believe that he wasn't getting his own way. And once, of course, defeat was inevitable, he realised there was simply no turning back. Moving forward, obviously the monarchy desperately tried to paint a different picture. And whether you liked Wallis Simpson or not, yes, she wasn't without blame, and yes, she was going along at this point to appease him. What else did she have? But actually, she, in effect, was not the real culprit here. It was the man who could have been king, but allegedly gave it all up for love. But really, he only wanted power, and she was part of the mechanics of that. As we remember all of those this coming weekend that gave up so much for us, let's just wish them all well, and God bless them all. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.